The Rag Coat by Lauren Mills. In winter, Papa carried me to church in a burlap bead sack because I didn't have a coat. Mama, Papa, Clemmy, and me, we'd all hitch a ride on Jeremy Miller's hay wagon and huddle under Mama's big quilt. I know Papa loved that quilt because he said it had all the nice, bright colors of the day in it, and the day was something he hardly ever saw. He worked down in the black coal mines and didn't come up till the sun was going. I told Papa it was warmer under that quilt than if I had a coat. He always laughed when I said that and told me, "Mina, you got that right. What are you thinking? People only need people and nothing else. Don't you forget that." Papa got sick with the miner's cough and couldn't work so much, so Mama stitched day and night on her quilts to try to make some money. When I was old enough to start school, I couldn't go. They needed me at home to help Mama. I would card all our quilt stuffing and keep Clemmy's dirty fingers out of all the cotton. I made a doll for myself by stitching up some of Mama's quilt scraps and stuffing cotton inside. I talked to her like she was my friend because I didn't have any. Mama was too busy for much talk, and when Papa was home, he mostly stared out the window. The summer I was 8, Papa called me to his rocking chair. I climbed up on his lap and he said, "You're getting big, Mina." "Too big for laps?" I asked. "Not too big for mine," he said softly. "But too big to still be at home. It's nearing time you went to school." I could hardly hold back from smiling just thinking about all the friends I would have. But I didn't want to leave Mama without a helper. "Papa," I said, "I can't go to school. Mama needs me here." Papa just looked at me steady and said, "They have books at school, Mina. You could learn things for those books that you can't learn at home." "But I don't have a coat, Papa," I quietly reminded him. "Mina," he said, "don't you worry about a coat. I'll think of something." But he never got the chance. Papa died that summer. Everyone came at once and brought us food. I couldn't figure out how so many people could squeeze into our little cabin, but somehow they managed it. They all said they knew my Papa well. I sat on a stool back by the wood stove with Clemmy on my lap so no one would step on us. I couldn't stand it. They all wore black. Black like the coal mines that killed my Papa. He didn't even like black. He liked all the bright colors of the day. So why were they wearing black, I wondered. School started in September. Mama said I could go, but I decided not to. I still didn't have a coat to wear, and I knew it was no use starting something I'd have to quit when the weather turned cold. Other mothers who had children in school came over to quilt with Mama. I called them the quilting mothers. That fall they were all working on a pattern called Joseph's Coat of Many Colors. I looked at it and said, "That Joseph sure was lucky to have such a coat. I wish I had one like that." "Why do you say that, Mina?" Mrs. Miller asked me. "Because then I could go to school," I said, a little embarrassed that I had mentioned it. "Well now, Mina," said Mrs. Miller, "I don't know that any of us has a spare coat we could hand down to you, but I'm sure we have some scraps to spare. We could piece them together and you'd have a coat like Joseph's after all." Mrs. Miller looked around the room and the other mothers nodded. Mama quickly protested, "You need all those rags for your own quilts. Don't go giving us things you need yourselves." They paid no attention to Mama. Mrs. Hunter said, "And we could use feed bags for the inside of the coat." My eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I said, "I have a feed sack Papa used to carry me in. I ran and fetched it. Will this do?" "Yes, it'll do just fine," they told me. Then I thought of something important. "But you need to make quilts to sell. You can't take time out to quilt a coat." "First things first," said Mrs. Miller, and they all repeated it. Mama smiled and shook her head. I saw tears in her eyes, too. The very next day I went to school, running most of the way to keep warm and thinking all the while of the coat I would soon have. The schoolhouse was just one room filled with 14 children. I had seen most of them at church, but never got a chance to talk to them much. I knew I would love school, even though I was put in the front row with the youngest ones, and Clyde Bradshaw whispered that it was because I was dumb. Then Shane Hunter pulled my braid, and Searchy Miller said I asked the teacher too many questions. But our teacher, Miss Campbell, smiled at me and said, "Smart people are those who have asked a lot of questions." My most favorite thing about school was sharing day. Each of us had our own day when we shared something special with the class. Clyde Bradshaw brought in a watch his grandpa gave him. It still ticked, and he made sure we all heard it. On her day, Lottie showed us the porcelain doll our aunt from New York had sent her. We all thought it was the most beautiful thing ever and wanted to touch it. But Lottie wouldn't let anyone near it. She said, "Nope, it's mine," which made everybody mad. I knew just what I would show when it was my sharing day. But I kept it a secret, and I knew the quilting mothers would keep it a secret too. Each day I hurried home to see my coat. It was looking like the colors of the fall days, the yellow golds of the birch leaves, the silvery grays and purples of the sky, the deep greens and browns of the pines, and the rusty reds of the chimney bricks. All the colors Papa would have chosen. I decided to put a piece of his work jacket in there. It just seemed right. The mothers worked as quickly as they could, but the cold weather was quicker. At recess, Sochi asked me why I didn't wear a coat. I told her I couldn't jump rope as well with one on. Jumping a lot kept me warm. I was fast becoming the best jump roper in school. Not last night, but the night before, 24 robbers came knocking at my door. That was my favorite rope tune. One night when Mama looked sad, I told her things could be worse. We could have 24 robbers knocking at our door. And she said, "Now what on earth would they want from us, Mina?" "Oh, Mama, they would want the coat first thing," I said. She laughed then, but I was most serious. Finally, my coat was done. It was so beautiful, and the quilting mothers had finished in time for my sharing day. That morning, I walked to school looking down at all the different colored pieces of my coat. All the stories the quilting mothers had told me about the rags and who they belonged to, I knew by heart. I had ended up choosing the most worn pieces for my coat because the best stories went with them. I was still looking down and repeating each story to myself when I bumped into Clyde outside the schoolyard. "Hey, ragcoat," he said, and all the others laughed. Before I knew it, Suchi, Lottie, and Clyde were dancing around me singing, "Ragcoat, ragcoat." Lottie said, "Look, it's even dirty with soot," and she poked her finger at my papa's cloth. Then Suchi said, "Hey, Mina, you're better off with no coat than that old ragged thing." "Maybe you're right," I yelled. "If I had no coat, then I would never have to come to school." And I broke through their circle and ran away from them far into the woods. I found an old log and sat on it for a long time, too angry to cry. I just stared across the fields Papa used to gaze at. "Oh, Papa, I wish you were here," I said. Then I couldn't help but cry. I cried for Papa, and I cried for the quilting mothers who had wasted their time. I was crying so hard, I rocked that old log. Then all at once I stopped because I felt something warm and familiar. The feed bag inside my coat made me feel like Papa's arms were around me again. I could almost hear him say, "Mina, people only need people and nothing else. Don't you forget that." I jumped off the log, wiped the tears from my cheeks, and brushed the leaves off my coat. "I won't forget, Papa," I said, and I headed back to school. When I walked into the schoolroom, Miss Campbell looked up, surprised. "Why, Mina," she said, "I was told you ran home sick." Sochi jumped up, her face all red. "That's not true, Miss Campbell," she blurted out. "We lied to you. Mina left because we made fun of her old coat." "I'll tell her," Sochi, I said. "It's not an old coat. It's a new coat." "But it's just a bunch of old rags," said Lottie. "It is not just a bunch of old rags," I said. "My coat is full of stories. Stories about everybody here." They all looked at me real puzzled. "Don't you see? These are all your rags." They still seemed puzzled. So I showed them. "Look, Shane, here's that blanket of yours that your mama's sister gave her the night you were born. The midwife said you wouldn't live but 3 days because you were so small. But your mama wrapped you up tight in that blanket and put you in a little box by the wood stove, and your papa kept the fire all night for 3 weeks. Of course you lived all right," I said, looking at big Shane. Shane was big, and you hung on to that blanket for years until it was nothing but shreds. "My blanket," he whispered. "I thought I'd never see it again." He looked at his old rag like he wanted to touch it. Then the others began discovering their old favorite things and crowded around me. They wanted their story told, and I remembered every one. I even showed the piece of the woolen jacket Sochi had let her calf wear when it was sick. Lottie's rag was a faded piece from the fancy dress her aunt from New York had sent her for her 7th birthday. And Clyde had a scrap from the pants he always wore when he went fishing with his grandpa. Sochi said, "Mina, I sure am sorry we ever said anything bad about your coat." "Me too," I heard the others murmur. "I wouldn't blame you if you didn't let us touch it," Lottie said. "I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to be our friend at all," said Clyde. "Friends share," I said. I let them each touch their rag. Then I showed them the feed sack inside my coat and told them how it made me feel my papa's arms again. Shane put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Mina, I bet you got the warmest coat in school." "Well, it took a whole lot of people to make it warm," I told them, and we all laughed.